Hello, everyone, and welcome to Liberty Starship, where we try to take you beyond the typical terrestrial politics. I'm one of your hosts, Eric, and I'm here with my co-host, Pete, and we would like to invite you to join us on the journey today. But before we do that, we do have a little bit of channel business we wanted to discuss with you. Peter, could you take that?
Yeah, sure. If you go to libertystarship.com right now, that's libertystarship.com, you can see our new website. Well, it's really just a link to our podcast. You can get the latest episodes of our podcast if you missed the live stream on Anchor FM, on Breaker, Radio Public, and more. We're going to be syndicated on all of those platforms and as well as Google Podcasts. And if you don't have one of those services or you don't use that for your podcasting, just copy the RSS link and load it into your podcast reader. So that's live. We currently have episode 1 up. This is episode 4, and episodes 2 and 3 and 4 will be up later this week. So you'll be able to access all episodes of the Liberty Starship podcast anywhere you are on your phone, on your laptop, any device. So now that we have that out of the way, Eric, could you get us going with the first daily distraction?
Absolutely. Let me grab the article here. All right, this is this is something that's big on everybody's mind at the moment. This is from Fox News, and it says, toilet paper site claims it calculates how long your supply will last. This was published 2 days ago, yes, on Fox News. And it says, it's one of the key questions as Americans wait out the coronavirus outbreak at home. How long will my stash of toilet paper last? A new website called How Much Toilet Paper claims it can roll out an answer for you. Nice pun there too, right? Simply set the top bar to how many rolls you currently have, and set the second bar to how many average bathroom visits you make per day, and the website's calculator does the rest. If you have a standard package of 4 rolls, for example, the website says that that will last you 32 days if you make an average of 2 bathroom visits per day. Nice little visual aids there. The website has now been used by over 2 million people and is helping to reduce toilet paper shortages around the world, it claims. The site, howmuchtoiletpaper.com says it was created by Ben Sassoon, a London-based student and software developer, and Sam Harris, an artist, after they had a discussion about how much toilet paper they used on a day-to-day basis and how that would change during the pandemic. The site also includes a plea that people refrain from buying up all the toilet paper they can find at their local grocery store, as many of those stores struggle to keep up with the demand from panicky customers. Quote, not everyone is able to get to a store and stock up on toilet roll, it says, adding, don't be selfish. Well, at least there's a good message there, right, Pete?
I guess so. Yeah, the hoarding of toilet paper is absolutely insane. There's no reason to think that if you're going to run out of anything, that toilet paper is going to be the thing that you run out of. How often do you go to the store and buy it? I imagine not very often. You probably have more than a 2-week supply. And so you're going to run out of things like, I don't know, fruit, vegetables, perhaps lunch meat, these sorts of things, long before you run out of toilet paper. But a couple people got panicked, and now we all have to panic. If you try to order toilet paper on Amazon, it's not going to be delivered until I think the end of April, beginning of May. That's how, I hate to say backed up, but that's how far behind they are on deliveries.
Yeah, we could have a lot of fun with this, with the puns for sure. It is a funny thing, but I just wanted to relate like a little bit of a personal story in terms of interacting with people on Twitter. And, there are people talking about all sorts of supply issues as far as food and all those things. My local grocery store, pretty much everything still is in some stock except toilet paper. That's about the only thing that's completely out of stock. But it's funny, I saw a thread, and a couple Twitter friends of mine were going back and forth about this, and one of the people actually admitted, I have 6 months of toilet paper and 3 weeks of food, and I think that just says it all right there. Yeah, check your priorities there, please, because that's ridiculous.
Absolutely insane.
So, did you have a daily distraction, Pete?
I sure did. And I was going to talk about the monkey deep state, but you know what? I have an even more important monkey story this week because it has to be monkeys. It's always monkeys. If you remember the last couple of weeks, we've talked about how monkeys in Thailand are being forced into what can only be called slavery, having to serve cocktails and work at bars in Thailand, which we thought was a pretty silly story at the time because, as we said, if monkeys are not happy with what they're doing, they're going to let you know. They're wild animals and they're stronger than they look. And then last week we found out that the monkeys had formed gangs and were responding to coronavirus in actually a very similar way to humans. That they were forming gangs because they weren't getting any food from the tourists. And the whole story, unfortunately, takes a very sad turn this week, which is why I had to follow up, because this is related to the Logpuri monkey gangs. A mysterious disease is killing off monkeys across corona-hit Indian states. 8 female monkeys and 1 male have been found dead by forest officials in Thrissur in the past 8 days alone, but the cause is baffling vets. They've ruled out things like Kia, Sanur, forest disease, or monkey fever. I'm sorry, monkey fever. I know it's probably a serious disease. I know it's probably terribly painful for the monkeys to have it, but the fact that it's called monkey fever just makes me laugh. And the details, I don't know who's doing this research. I don't know how this is a story. I think the UK media is just obsessed with this, as am I. I guess that explains why they publish this, because I can't get enough of what's going on with the monkey gangs. It comes not long after 4 other monkeys were found dead in an orchard, and 2 seem to have gone mad in Puranpur Tehsil in Pilibhit. The cause is still to be determined after one of the crazed monkeys bit a fish. How would you know that he's crazed? If a monkey bites you, how do you know that he's doing it because he's crazy and not because he's a monkey? It is suspected monkeys may be poisoned by villagers. I hope that's not the case. I know they're a pest, but that would make me really sad if the Indian villagers are poisoning the monkeys, whether or not they have monkey fever or the coronavirus, or they're just looking for French fries that tourists aren't leaving anymore. But that's the thing, isn't it? That they become dependent on us. Just like the orphan monkeys who are serving beer at Thai bars, they can't survive in the wild. We've domesticated them inadvertently. Yeah, if there's anything that's tragic about all of this, that would be it. That these monkeys are supposed to eat things like crabs and other animals in their natural environment, and they just lost the ability to do that. So maybe we shouldn't feel sorry. Well, no, I do feel sorry for them. That makes me sad. He added the crazy primate near the railway tracks may have drank toxic water.
Toxic water.
Toxic water. I think there's a lot of that in the area. They don't have the best water supply, the most reliable.
Oh yeah,
water
sanitation issues.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it'd be a little surprising if it's not a more common disease. I mean, it seemed like if that's the cause, if the cause is bad sanitation, you'd think that it would be just constant. So
yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
be interesting to see what goes on next week in the plight of the monkeys.
Yeah. This has gotten kind of melancholy for me. Now the monkeys are almost like family. But... All right, what's your next distraction?
This is a pretty good one, I think. I don't know if you caught this one or not, but this is kind of over the top. I
Okay.
unfortunately actually saw this as it was going on. Now, this is from NBC News. All right. But I saw the posts. I actually saw it when it was going on. I'm on Twitter a lot. So Madonna, of course, had to do a little message. I don't know. Did you see it, Pete? Did you
I
see
did
her?
see it.
Okay. So this is from NBC News. And I got this off of their main page. Okay. This was not listed as entertainment news or anything like that. It says Madonna's coronavirus bathtub video garners mixed reactions. So it says, quote, "That's the thing about COVID-19, Madonna says in the video posted to Instagram Sunday. It doesn't care about how rich you are, how famous you are. The Queen of Pop has garnered criticism for appearing to trivialize the effects of coronavirus in a video taken while she sat in a bathtub full of rose petals as piano music played in the background. That's the thing about COVID-19, Madonna says in the video posted Instagram Sunday. It doesn't care about how rich you are, how famous you are, how funny you are, how smart you are, where you live, how old you are, what amazing stories you can tell." And there you go, folks. There's the picture right there. If you're listening, it's well, the picture really is worth 1,000 words. So it's Madonna sitting in the bathtub with rose petals, and she's kind of got her knees up, so she's kind of covering herself. It's quite the image there. It's quite the image, and it goes on.
I don't
Go ahead,
understand
Pete.
why this is going viral. What's the point? Where's the story? She's in a bathtub with rose petals.
Yeah, she's in the bathroom with rose petals. All right, completely naked. I should also add that. Obviously, she is in the
Okay,
bathtub.
but
Uh,
when Madonna's the subject, that's not really news. I think that's just
no, it's not.
how she is in a lot of her content.
But I will say the angle on this story is that there are people that were upset because they did feel that this was kind of callous and kind of out of touch. There have been a couple other stories where people have been criticizing celebrities, I think very rightfully, about being
Uh-huh.
kind of out of touch. In particular, with her main message being that we're like, we're all in this together. It doesn't matter how rich you are. Nobody really
That's
buys
true.
that.
Oh no,
But
I buy it. Absolutely.
you buy it.
Look at how many celebrities
You
have
don't
gotten
you don't think
coronavirus.
she has special access to tests or to medical care if she needs it or anything like that? You
She
think she's in the same boat as the rest of us?
yeah, okay. But I don't know that something like this, that's a virus. I don't know that she's not immune from getting it. There's lots of celebrities who have gotten the coronavirus, and it's something that can change your life. I think, no matter how rich you are. There are some tests being done with the what's it called, chloroquine,
Yes, yes.
but we don't know that that works for sure yet. There's some indications that it does. I suppose she would have access to that if she were to contract it, but it could also just ruin her life. She could have permanent lung scarring, and she'd never be able to sing professionally again. That would be, I mean, if you're a professional singer, I'm sure she has millions of dollars, and her life would be fine without having to record another album or go on tour again. But I wouldn't want to have coronavirus even if I were rich. I guess I'd rather be rich and have the virus than be poor and have the virus. But
Well, the point being made here in the article, it states, is while Madonna is correct in stating that coronavirus affects people from all backgrounds, many were quick to respond that the pandemic will not affect those from more affluent backgrounds in the same ways it will affect those
mm,
with less money and connections. According to an estimate from the United Nations Labor Agency, the coronavirus pandemic could claim up to 24.7 million jobs. I also recently saw a video from Dr. Campbell, who I talked about on a previous episode, and he kind of brought up this point as well. You have a real issue in places, places in Africa, places with extreme poverty, where isolation is not possible,
right.
period. Because in those places, if you don't work that day, you don't eat. Isolation is not possible, period. Period. Not going to happen.
Hmm.
So
Well, that's an
it's a
important point.
distressing thing, and It's just something that, again, that's the issue of why, yes, your economic circumstances do indeed have a bearing on how you were affected by coronavirus.
Right. And there's some huge cities in Africa because there's just nowhere else outside of the city to work. So I can see that. If your concern is about working, you may not even have the disease. You may never have the disease. But if you're thrown out of a job and you depend on that job, that can be awful.
Oh, absolutely. And then, of course, also the people that have to work sick, because there are people
Sure.
that are, especially in poor countries, that will have to work sick. They will have no choice. Again, there are nations out there where if you do not work that day, you do not eat, and your children don't eat.
Right.
So, Pete, did you have another daily distraction for us?
I sure did. This one isn't even a distraction. It's just a news story that I thought was important. We don't often talk about what's going on south of our border. We kind of think that we're insulated from the violence that's happening in Mexico. And to a large degree, I think we are for now. Uh, Arizona isn't immune. The cartels are able to cross the border. They are crossing the border. You've been to those meetings where county sheriff will stand up and say, "My deputies have been fighting sicarios or uh, assassins from this cartel or that cartel. We're accepting donations. Please, we need community support in order to fight these guys." And there's a cartel. At one point, the cartels were very much. We always talk about, oh well, it's the border. It's the border where you have the problem, or it's the Pacific coast, or it's the Atlantic coast where they're shipping drugs in or out through port cities. But what we need to realize is that right now Mexico is completely engulfed in drug violence. And this headline, it's not even really a story in some ways because this has happened in such slow motion. This isn't a new cartel, but they're gaining strength and it's really worrisome because what they have the potential to do is displace a lot of local governments and so what you'll have is there won't even be what we would consider a legitimate local government anymore if the cartels are powerful enough. They are the police, they are the army, and that's exactly what's happening. This Jalisco New Generation cartel, and what's important to know about them is that they're from Southwest Mexico. They're not from the border region. They're not from the port cities. They're from Guadalajara, from Southwest Mexico. And they're, as the article says here, this is the Associated Press. They have a reputation for ruthlessness and violence, unlike any since the fall of the old Zetas cartel. Now, the Zetas, if you don't know, those were the Mexican special forces who were recruited by, I believe, the Sinaloa cartel. They were originally paid to be security, and then they realized we have the guns. We don't need to be working for anybody else. We can run our own cartel. And that's exactly what they did. So the Zetas were very dangerous, the most dangerous cartel in Mexico. And now they're being displaced. And why is this happening? Well, because the new generation cartel is willing to work with local communities. They're saying, hey, we're not going to kidnap anybody. We're not going to cause any trouble in your town. Just don't bother us. Don't get in our way. And that's going to last until their competition is out of the way. Let's face it. Because once they feel that they're entrenched and they can begin extorting and kidnapping people again, and they've already been doing that. So a lot of this is illusory. They're making promises that I don't believe they have any intention to keep, but they have the potential to, like I say, essentially become the government. Jalisco so likes violence and heavy armament that U.S. prosecutors said its operatives tried to buy belt-fed M16 machine guns in the United States and once brought down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade. I remember when that happened. I remember that they commandeered city buses tipped them over, lit them on fire as blockades when one of their leaders was kidnapped. I believe that was New Generation Jalisco as well, or Jalisco New Generation. Um, the nomenclature, when you translate from English to Spanish, can get a little mixed up. So, again, not really a distraction, but maybe something that you should be aware of. The media, we're all focusing on the coronavirus right now, but the fact is that what's happening south of our border right now is essentially a civil war. About 35,000 people were killed in the Mexican drug war last year. Imagine if 70,000 people were killed in a war in the United States in a given year. It's absolutely horrific what's going on. This is one of the most bloody civil wars in human history, and we act like it's not a big deal. Oh well, it's just crime. It's just Mexico. But it is a big deal. It's not just something that we can be complacent about, that we can say, not my problem, because if this destabilizes the government to our south, we're talking about a country of 180 million people, give or take. If the Mexican government continues to be destabilized, the problem will not stay south of our border. We're going to have essentially a rogue nation south of the Rio Grande. And it's time for us to wake up and realize that this is our problem too.
It's pretty
I really
interesting
don't.
because the current president of Mexico has very much changed the strategy of the previous presidents in terms of
Mhm.
essentially withdrawing the military from the fight. The military was heavily involved in this, and the current president of Mexico has tried to create sort of his own version of a national guard, I suppose is what you would call it. Interestingly enough, I read an article not too long ago that one of the issues that they were having was that new security force that he put together. They
Mhm.
were actually being involved more with border control because of the agreements that they were trying to make with the Trump administration, and they were
Right.
actually using that National Guard to actually try to control their southern border because they have all sorts of problems on their southern border as well. So it's a mess. It's a huge mess. It's only going to get worse.
Right.
It's
They
only
had
going
the
to get worse.
caravans coming through their southern border. Those caravans, you may have noticed, they're not in the news anymore. They've gone away. They weren't treated very well by the Mexican government, which I guess is fine. They weren't being tortured. They weren't being abused in any sense. They just weren't being given the kind of supplies. They were being put in tents, but not the sort of tents, I guess. They weren't given the sort of lodgings that they wanted. But one thing I wanted to say about this change in strategy, it's been a complete failure. This policy of abrazos no balazos, hugs not bullets, is a complete joke. It's a joke.
Yeah, that is a joke. Yeah.
Under the previous president, the number of killings went from 12,000 down to almost 6,000, and then it went right back up to where it was before. And I don't want to say that's fine, but compared to what's happening now, if the murder rate were simply stable, if the problem were stable, that would be an improvement on what's happening now. What's happening now is the problem is spiraling out of control. You've gone from 12,000 or so murders every year at the end of Peña Nieto's term, who was the last president. He was from the Institutional Revolutionary Party. 12,500 murders a year, give or take, to now 35,000 murders a year. So you can see the problem is almost three times as terrifying as it was just 2 years ago. And that's hard to imagine. How could you have the problem triple when you start out with the thinking that, well, we're going to make some kind of a deal with them in order to reduce violence? There's no way this could be done more incompetently.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
It's
president,
a huge
yeah,
problem. It's a huge
yeah,
problem.
AMLO has just failed in every way that he could have failed, and the people who voted for him, I guess they deserve better. On the other hand, he's still somehow very popular, and I don't know how that could possibly be. I don't know why his support isn't just collapsing among the Mexican people. Maybe it is, but it isn't being reported. Maybe the polling numbers we're seeing are fictitious, which wouldn't surprise me. But it absolutely blows my mind that the people of Mexico aren't marching in the streets and demanding that something change right now.
I think it's at some point it becomes the new normal and people just get used to it. So it's
How can it be?
unfortunate.
It's 3 times as bad as it was just 2 years ago. How could it already
Yeah.
be the new normal? I don't understand it.
Yeah. I don't either. Honestly, I don't either. It's a difficult thing to understand.
So on that cheery note, I think we're done with the daily distractions, and hope that I hope that things improve in Mexico, because it really does bother me that when you read about this, it seems like this has been going on forever. It's been going on for 15 years, and there's simply no end in sight. So, what
Yeah.
is your story? Are we going to talk about the coronavirus?
Yeah. Again, I stick into the classics here: coronavirus versus Liberty.
Our greatest hits?
Unfortunately, again, it's one of those things that very few people are actually talking about. I think everybody right now is just willing to give their liberty away. I've got a subtitle for this one, and I am talking about de facto versus de jure martial law and the escalation that we had in the last week. As I predicted last week, I said that other states, other communities would follow the LA model, and sure enough, they did. And then what happened was the state of California decided to escalate things up another notch with what's being called shelter in place. And I have the text for that particular order as well. So I'm going to get right to it. So we've got the executive order that the governor of California issued a few days ago. It was actually very soon after we aired our show. March 4th is when the executive order was I'm sorry, not March 4th. That's talking about the state of emergency.
Now,
Um,
is this modeled on the Los Angeles order that we looked at last week?
it is, and it isn't. That's the point. Is it actually hasn't. This is the escalation. So
Okay.
the Los Angeles order that we discussed last week, that one applied to things like, for instance, bars, nightclubs, movie theaters. That's pretty standard now. That's kind of where we are in Arizona. Although in Arizona, Governor Ducey has stipulated that counties that have not had any reports of the coronavirus, they are not affected by his executive order at this time. There's only 4 counties left in Arizona that aren't affected by that, but he essentially copied LA. I mean,
I
for all
see.
intents and purposes, he copied LA. The 4 counties that are not affected in Arizona are all very small counties. The largest one is Mojave County. There's only 200,000 people in Mojave County. These are small counties. So there's only 4 counties left in Arizona that haven't been affected by the governor's order here. But in terms of California, this was an escalation. So we've got the justifications here, and then it says, now therefore I, Gavin Newsom, governor of the state of California, in accordance with the authority vested in me by the state constitution and statutes of the state of California, and in particular, government code sections 8567, 8627, and 8665, do hereby issue the following order to become effective immediately. Hereby ordered to preserve the public health and safety and to ensure the healthcare delivery system is capable of serving on and prioritizing those at the highest risk and vulnerability. All residents are directed to immediately heed the current state public health directives, which I ordered the Department of Health to develop for the current statewide status of COVID-19. These directives are consistent with the March 19, 2020 memorandum on identification of essential critical infrastructure workers during COVID-19 response, found at link, that's a Homeland Security link.
Okay.
So these directives follow the order of the state public health officer from March 1920. And to protect public health, I, as state public health officer and director of the California Department of Public Health, order all individuals living in the state of Arizona to stay home
California.
or at their state of California to stay home or at their place of residence, except as needed to maintain continuity of operations of the federal critical infrastructure sectors as outlined at the link. So what you have is everybody is now starting to follow this particular order. I believe Pennsylvania just implemented this as well. There's also, I believe, Dallas County, which includes obviously Dallas, metropolitan area of Dallas. It's like dominoes. So just as what happened with LA and everybody started copying the LA model, this is sort of a crystal ball into the future of what's happening as far as the coronavirus's effect. So yeah, we're looking at lockdowns in statewide, citywide, countywide, depending on the jurisdictions you live in right now. And this is quite an escalation.
Now you said that this was an
corona.
escalation. Yeah. So what is the big difference between this and the Los Angeles order from last week?
Yeah, so the big difference is the shelter in place order. Under the Los Angeles order, you didn't have you could still technically go to work as long as you weren't involved in one of those industries that were specifically outlined in that order, such as being a worker at a bar or being at a restaurant where you were not doing deliveries or pickup, bowling alleys, arcades, things of that nature. Those were the only things that were actually shut down. So people still had freedom of movement. Now, what this order does is it says that if you are not in a quote unquote critical infrastructure job, you're not supposed to be going out. You are in lockdown. And that's why I have my little subsection there about de facto versus de jure martial law. De facto martial law simply means military rule. That's all it means. But the connotation of martial law is exactly along the lines of what's happening here. Your freedom of movement are suspended. You're no longer supposed to be going outside. And it says here, if I can get to the right section, this order shall be enforceable pursuant to California law, including but not limited to Government Code Section 8665. And the natural question is, what is Government Code Section 8665? What does it say? What does it mean? Well, I just happen to have it here for you. So let me bring it up. And this is from the California Code. When I first saw this, I was like, what are they talking about? Is that a federal statute? What is that? So no, this is a California state code. This is from the California Legislative Information Site, which has all of their state laws. And here is Section 8665. It says, any person who violates any of the provisions of this chapter or who refuses or willfully neglects to obey any lawful order or regulation promulgated or issued as provided in this chapter shall be guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction thereof shall be punishable by a fine of not to exceed $1,000 or by imprisonment for not to exceed 6 months, or by both such fine and imprisonment. So you can get up to 6 months in jail and $1,000 fine if you violate this.
So the chapter is called the California Emergency Services Act. So I'm assuming that this empowers the governor to issue emergency orders in the case of some kind of a disaster, whether it's a natural disaster or something like the coronavirus.
Right. It's under what they're Title II, which it says Government of the State of California, Division 1, General, Chapter 7, California Emergency Services Act. Okay. So I'm not familiar with what Title II, what else that refers to in the California, California law, but
sure, but it's the California State Code. So,
but my point is that this is a criminal statute. Right. Basically, what this does is this criminalizes otherwise law-abiding citizens who, if they are in violation of the curfew, then they can be arrested. They can be fined. They can be arrested, or they can have both. And again, this is quite an escalation of what's been going on with the limitations that are in response to the coronavirus. And as I have this little ticker at the bottom of the screen, this is, I think, very much de facto martial law. Now, what is actual martial law? What is de jure martial law? Well, I found a very good article here from Newsweek that actually talks about how this is supposed to work, or at least the most recent thinking on it from the most recent military perspective. So this is a Newsweek article. It's dated March 20th. It says, inside the U.S. military's plans to stop civil disturbances amid coronavirus pandemic, something they haven't done in 30 years. Now, that's not exactly true. We do have the example of Katrina, where there was the military was involved with Katrina. It wasn't just the National Guard. The National Army was involved with that. Says, but with the National Guard now active in 22 states and governors continue to declare more severe emergency measures daily, the U.S. military is preparing forces to assume a larger role in the coronavirus response, including the controversial mission of quelling civil disturbances and enforcing the law, a mission that the military has not engaged in for almost 30 years. Again, that's not exactly true. The military circles, opinion is split over whether federal forces should muscle their way in to do more. And I would point out that this is exactly what the mayor of New York is actually calling for. I did see him on CNN calling for the military to take over, quote unquote. Back to the article. State governors and their respective National Guard units, not the federal government and the active duty military. Again, state governors and their respective National Guard units, not the federal government and the active duty military, are primarily responsible for handling domestic emergencies. That's the law. It's also common sense, since local officials are always closer to a crisis and generally more familiar with the people affected. And this is a Newsweek article, and I'm going to read that again. State governors and their respective National Guard units, not the federal government and the active duty military, are primarily responsible for handling domestic emergencies. That's the law, and it's also common sense, since local officials are always closer to a crisis and generally more familiar with the people affected. I feel like I should read that a third time, because the thing is, I don't think people understand this. I really feel like people don't understand this.
So when they say National Guard units are responsible, the National Guard is the military. It's not.
It is and it isn't. That's the point. The National Guard can be the military in terms of they can be nationalized, but
they are military units
up to the point that they are federalized. They are fulfilling the role of the militia. They're not the military.
Okay, but a militia is a military unit, right? They're not law enforcement. There's a qualitative distinction between law enforcement, say, and the military. And I understand that this isn't the U.S. military, but to say that these are not military units is really splitting hairs, and I don't even know if that's an accurate.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's fair to say that's splitting hairs, because the National Guard, especially even under the president, the National Guard can be used as a domestic tool, if you will.
Right.
Let's go back for a second. Let's talk about, for instance, like desegregation of schools, okay?
Right.
And what happened in Little Rock and things like that, okay? Because that's a good example, all right?
Right.
So you had a situation in Little Rock where basically the governor of the state was flouting the federal law, federal mandate that schools desegregate. And what happened was the governor tried to use the National Guard to bar Black students from going to school. The mayor of the city appealed to the president. And what the president ended up doing was he federalized the National Guard to enforce the law. And then he sent in 101st Airborne to essentially put bayonets to their back and make sure they did it. That's what happened. Okay, that's what actually happened. So so rather than having the 101st Airborne go in and do it, you see what I'm saying? And you say it's splitting hairs, but it's actually kind of important, because it's an important distinction that the national military, the regular army, gets does not enforce domestic laws. Period. Whether they're federal, whether they're state, whether they're local, whatever, they don't do that. That's the role of the National Guard, and the National Guard inherits that role because of the Constitution and because of the provisions for the militia, which state that the militia is supposed to be used to deal with law enforcement. That's what it says. So that's the constitutional issue there.
Okay. It seems to me that the National Guard is essentially, or you have the National Guard and the Army Reserves, but in the case of the National Guard, these are state level units, just like you have the Arizona National Guard, the Arizona Air National Guard, and so on. This is the state's military. And so if the governor is using the National Guard to enforce the law instead of state troopers and local police, that is already martial law. Right?
That's an interesting perspective, but that's not exactly. I don't think that's exact. Okay, that's again. It actually goes back to my ticker when you're talking about de facto versus de jure. So de facto, I think you're correct. I think de facto. Honestly, de facto. My point is de facto goes all the way back to with no National Guard, and the police are enforcing curfews and things like that. To me, that is de facto martial law. Because the connotation is we're limiting your ability to assemble, we're limiting your ability to travel, we're limiting your fundamental rights, their most basic human rights. We're limiting. It doesn't really matter who's doing it, right? It doesn't really matter if it's a police officer or if it's a soldier, all right? Mm-hmm. And then the National Guard is considered somewhere in between, even though yes, they are soldiers, but legally speaking, the de jure part. They aren't. You know what I mean? They are militia.
Sure.
They are citizen soldiers by definition. That is our tradition. That's what we refer to them as. They are citizen soldiers. They are part of our community. Okay? They are not from the 100. It's not like Little Rock where the 101st Airborne is coming in from, God knows where, right? Okay, these are people that live in your own community. These are people that work beside you in your own community. They are citizen soldiers. And that's why they are the ones that have the primary responsibility to deal with a situation like this. So when we're talking about 100% de jure martial law, we're talking about the regular Army. We're talking about the regular Navy, the Marine Corps, you know what I mean? The Air Force. Those elements getting involved directly with law enforcement and doing something like enforcing a curfew, which I think a lot of these governors and mayors, that's what they want. It's exactly what they want. Because they know their own police force is inadequate, and they also know the National Guard is not necessarily adequate. There was actually a pretty good article, I don't have it up right now, where the head of the Arizona National Guard was talking about the current mission they have in Arizona, which is to help with the food supply. That's all they're doing right now. So the first thing they did was they're helping staff the local food bank. Okay, so that's the first thing that they're doing. And one of the things that he mentioned, because people, of course, are asking for escalation. There are people right now, just ready to give all their freedoms away, and they're asking for escalation. And one of the things that the head of the actual commander of the Arizona National Guard brought up, which I thought was great, and that he said, was you have to realize a lot of my people are in critical infrastructure. They're citizens. A lot of them are police officers, firefighters, doctors, nurses, you know what I mean? Medical technicians. And if I start activating them, they're not going to be able to do those primary jobs anymore. You know what I mean? Right. So there is a fundamental difference between the regular military, active duty military, and the National Guard, legally and practically. Legally and practically, there's a big difference. They are similar, obviously, to the reserves. I myself served in the Navy Reserve. And interestingly enough, I would like to mention, part of this also comes down to a law called posse comitatus. And posse comitatus is a law that basically says the Army, and it does say the Army, is not supposed to be used for domestic law enforcement. And there are exceptions to that. They make exceptions. That's why we have the term war on drugs and things like that. There are exceptions that are made, but they're not supposed to be used. Interestingly enough, it is just the Army that's specified in that law. And I know there are legal interpretations that say that applies to the Air Force as well, because the Air Force was part of the Army, but that does not apply to the Navy and the Marine Corps. And if I don't know if you remember, but back in the LA riots in the 90s, they actually did send in the Marines. And I think that's one of the reasons why, is because posse comitatus does not specifically bars, it's a law that specifically bars the Army from being involved in domestic law enforcement. But they did actually send the Marines in during the LA riots. So that's probably the last point that I'll bring up there.
I didn't realize that the Marines had been involved in suppressing the LA riots. So what's the big takeaway here? It seems like you're obviously against this, but
Well,
what sort
I've
of
said this before. I've said this before in the last time I brought this up.
okay?
I'm asking questions, okay, because a lot of people aren't. And one of the big takeaways is that part of the article that I read 3 times, and I read that very deliberately multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
The primary function, I mean, the primary organization that is supposed to be dealing with domestic emergencies is the state government. It is the National Guard. It is your local police department. It is your state police department. It is not the Army. And people like the mayor of New York, like actor Sean Penn of all people, I saw him too, who are advocating for this military takeover and having no idea what they're talking about. They have to be questioned. They have to be questioned. You cannot follow these kinds of things blindly. They have to be questioned. They have to be questioned now as they are happening. I've actually seen people commenting, online saying, "Oh, we can think about this later. Right now, we don't have time to think."
Right.
Yeah, we do need to have time to think right now, because these kind of things can have implications far down the line in other circles. Because the other thing is, remember, we are a nation that is based a great deal on precedents. And when you establish a precedence, that means that precedence can be emulated, and it can be used. It can be used to justify things you never thought it could be used to justify.
Sure. We start with some rules, and then something happens, and pretty soon we're daisy chaining these events. And were those legitimate in the first place? Well, maybe they weren't, but the fact that it's already a precedent means that, well, it must be okay. And the next time it's a little
it's
easier.
just all that.
And the next
It's
time
just
a little
all that
easier.
much. Yes, exactly. It's just all that much easier next time. It's just all that much easier next time. And there are people comparing this very much to the internment of the Japanese in World War II. Because
it's funny. In our first episode, we talked about exactly this example, the internment of the Japanese. We talked about, could we quarantine 100 million people the way the Chinese currently are, or the equivalent, because they quarantined 100 million people, and we have a population that's much smaller than theirs. So we said, okay, 5% of that. So let's say 15 million people. Well, right now, if we're quarantining all of New York City, that's already proportionally more than the Chinese quarantined, if the number 100 million is indeed correct. So I don't know what to make of that.
We're already headed in that direction, because we've got the entire state of California, right, under lockdown. I believe Pennsylvania, New York is headed that way if they're not there already. So I mean, these are big states. So we're already headed in that direction.
Yeah, I understand the fear, because if people won't quarantine themselves, they're endangering everybody around them. And so the thinking is, we have to do this, or else people are going to die. Perhaps 1 million Americans or 2 million Americans could die. And that may sound hyperbolic. A lot of people are going to tell you that couldn't happen. But 2 weeks ago, we didn't think any of this could happen. 2 weeks ago, we thought this was just going to be the flu. And the people who were worrying, the people who were warning that this was going to be a pandemic, that people would be hiding in their houses, that we would shut down the entire economy, that 20 or 30% of the population would be unemployed. This is like nothing else we've lived through. People have compared this to 9/11, but I'll be honest, this seems a lot worse than 9/11. In 9/11, 3,000 people died, and yeah, the stock market took a big hit. But basically, we got back to business very soon after that. It was shocking. People looked like and felt like zombies for weeks or months after that. But this seems just apocalyptic. We're shutting down businesses. In fact, that's probably a good segue to our next segment, we're going to talk about the economy and how the coronavirus in particular is affecting the economy, although not exclusively. In California, one of the businesses that was shut down as being non-essential was Tesla. Now, Tesla is a huge company. I don't know their market cap off the top of my head, but their stock price was around 1,000, and then it tumbled to around $350. So it dropped by 2/3 very quickly because of the virus. Elon Musk tried to keep the factory going. He tried to keep production going. He was told he was not essential. And so we're shutting down production at the time when we can't afford to shut down production. Because, okay, luxury cars, do we need more luxury cars in a crisis? We don't. Not right now. But we need respirators. We need to build some hospital beds. We've talked about that all this commercial real estate is opening up, and we need to maybe put some beds in there, because if this crisis continues to metastasize, I checked before the show what the number of cases was. It's right now around 43,000 cases. Yesterday, it was 33,000 cases. So that's a 30% increase in just one day. This is absolutely, we can't afford to simply stay at home. Somebody needs to produce the masks that the doctors and nurses are going to use at the hospitals. We can't afford to simply shut down our manufacturing, because we cannot consume what we do not produce. And that's my first point, is that the problem is production, not consumption. A lot of people will tell you that consumption is 2/3 of the American economy, and that's an illusion. We can only consume because we produce. Are we leveraged? Absolutely. But leveraged on what? What's the collateral? People invest in the United States. They invest in our markets because they know that we produce, that we are a manufacturing powerhouse. They lend us money. Why do they lend us money? Because we produce. They wouldn't lend us money. I know the federal government is terribly in debt. American consumers have huge credit card debts. We have so much debt as a society and as a country. We probably have far too much debt. But nobody would be lending us money if they didn't have some expectation that we would be able to pay it back. And so to shut down production and think that we're going to spend our way out of this crisis is absolutely delusional. It completely misunderstands how an economy works. We must continue to produce. And maybe part of the answer is to get General Motors and Tesla Motors producing respirators. Whatever they have to do, this is in many ways like a war. But we need to keep people at work, if possible, safely. Yes, I'm not saying endanger people's lives, but get those factory workers tested. Make sure that they're healthy, and then put them back to work, because we can't just allow them to starve to death. We can't allow them to get behind on their mortgages. There's a lot of companies that are forgiving rent payments right now, that are forgiving mortgages, and I'm glad. I'm so happy that a lot of people are being so generous in this time. But that's not a long-term solution either. At the end of the day, somebody has to pay for these buildings. Somebody has to pay the rent. One thing that you and I also talked about was we can't afford to have another bailout of Wall Street. Politically, people will get their pitchforks. They will burn down Washington, maybe literally, if Wall Street is bailed out and Main Street is hung out to dry again. And thankfully, I think the president has heard the American people, and the bailouts that we're hearing about right now are cash payments, sort of Andrew Yang style payments, $1,000, $2,000 to citizens who are making less than $95,000 a year. Is that going to solve the problem?
It's essentially the UBI. Yes, it's essentially the UBI.
Yeah, it's a very short-term UBI in order to, I guess, prop up Americans who are going to be suffering here in the next few months, to make sure that.
And I will say the Democratic Socialists are having a field day with that. They're having a field day with that.
They are, and it's very strange because Nancy Pelosi is holding it up right now, and you say, why is she doing that? I mean, she wants more things in the bill.
Oh, we know
It's
exactly why she's doing
she has leverage.
that. We know why she's doing it.
It's ghoulish. I don't know if this will solve the problem. I suspect it won't. I don't think that $1,000 payments or $2,000 payments, it may stop people from grabbing pitchforks and, like I say, burning down Washington, D.C. But I can't even imagine what the long term effects are. What I do know is that when UBI has been tried, it was tried in Finland. It was an absolute disaster. Now, this is a very different case. It was tried in Finland during sort of normal times. It was tried on a small scale. This is a very large scale. We're talking, what, billions, tens of billions of dollars that are going to be paid out. I don't know how many people this bailout would cover, so I can't estimate how much it's going to cost. I know that it is going to be means tested. I don't know if it's going to be everybody. We'll see exactly what happens there. I do know that right now bond rates are going up, even though we've cut interest rates to zero at the Federal Reserve. The problem is nobody wants to lend money right now because they're afraid it's not going to be paid back. And so we're trying to keep interest rates down. And for the first time in, I guess, a generation, we're seeing interest rates go up. We're seeing bond rates go up, which is good if you're a saver. It's good if you are on a fixed income, you're a senior citizen, and you don't have a safe place to put your income. One of the real tragedies over the past decade is that people who are retired don't have a safe place to put their income. They can't put their money in bonds, which used to be a safe place because the interest rate was 0.1%, something obscene like that. And nobody can afford to live unless you're very wealthy. Nobody can afford to live on 0.1% of their savings. If they were getting a reasonable return, like 2%, 3%, 5% would be historically normal. That would be doable for a lot of people, but 0.1%, you just can't do it. So they have to put their money into the stock market, and then the stock market can go up and it can go down. And we've already seen the stock market has gone from $29,000, excuse me, 29,000. The Dow Jones has gone from 29,000 down to around 18,000 today. So anybody who had their life savings in the stock market is getting wiped out. We talked about the housing market. And I said a few weeks ago that I think, in fact, I've been saying for months now that I think the housing market is going to collapse this year because it's at unsustainable levels. Unsustainable levels. In 2007, 2008, when the housing market collapsed, the stock market went down, everything went down, commodities, everything collapsed at the same time. The Case-Shiller index, which is a measurement of basically how expensive houses are, was at 200. And of course, that number goes up because as wages go up, as the economy increases, you expect housing prices to go up. But this is above and beyond. Right now, the Case-Shiller index is at 210, so it's higher than it was at the time of the collapse. And I don't see that people can afford to buy houses anymore. Even people who are doing fairly well, if you don't live out in the country, out in one of the exurbs, as they call it, how can you afford to buy a house? A lot of people have been talking about this, that millennials aren't buying homes, they're just renting perpetually. Well, right now, commercial real estate is in free fall because businesses are shutting their doors. They're not going to be paying their rent. And yeah, a lot of these places are going to go rent free for a few months and maybe they'll have some kind of forgiveness and hopefully things will come back. But a lot of these businesses simply will never bounce back. And so you're going to have a lot of empty real estate. And if commercial real estate goes out of business, that affects the entire real estate market. It's not going to be contained to the commercial sector. We're going to see the price of housing, and a lot of people who because they couldn't put their money into the stock market, or they didn't want to, or maybe they did have a lot of their investments in the stock market. A huge investment for a lot of Americans is their home. And so people are going to take a bath if the housing market crashes again this year, and I absolutely believe it will, especially if unemployment. A lot of people are saying, You have Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan are predicting 20%, 30% unemployment this year because of the coronavirus pandemic. People are going to start defaulting on their mortgages. It's not just going to be the commercial sector. So bankruptcies, delinquencies are going to pile up. And what that's going to do is suck a lot of money out of the economy, essentially. And we're going to see deflationary forces because there'll be fewer dollars in the market chasing the same number of goods, not as many services. And so, what is the Fed doing? They're pumping a lot of money into the economy. They don't want deflation. They don't want the price of houses to go down. They don't want the price of the stock market to go down. They're trying to pump up this bubble again, but this is a bubble. It's been a bubble. And what the coronavirus has been, it's been the pin that has pricked the bubble. It's not the problem itself. It's simply the match that lit the fuse. The dynamite already had to be there. So right now, cash is king. If you have cash, good for you. It's a lot better than holding on to stock. But oh boy, that's not going to last very long if they start sending out cash payments to everybody, if they keep putting money. Right now, the Federal Reserve is out buying bonds. Now, one thing that the Federal Reserve is not supposed to do is monetize the debt. They're not supposed to buy government debt because that's the same as almost literally printing money. But what they can do is they can buy treasury bonds from other people. And if people know that the Federal Reserve is buying treasury bonds, well, you buy the bonds and you flip it to the Fed. It's the same thing. So that's where we are right now. So let's just remember what happened in 2008. The stock market crashed. Gold dropped from 975 down to 740, so it went down 30%. Copper went down 75%. Silver was cut in half. Wheat was cut in half. So all commodities crashed at the same time in sympathy with the stock market. Because like I said, money was sucked out of the system. And so we saw a temporary deflation. But as soon as the Fed started pumping money into the economy, and they're already doing it, we haven't seen the effects yet. It's going to take time for us to see commodities start to recover and be reinflated. But that's what's happening. They're trying to reinflate this economy. And so what happened was the price of gold went as high as almost $1,900. So it was 2.5 times its low. And we're going to see the same thing, I believe, happen. So gold is going to pick up. Housing will pick up eventually, but it will be inflation. It won't be, of course, real growth because we're not producing. That's the thing that we need to get back to. And this was something I was really hopeful about with President Trump, was that he was not just America first, but also manufacturing first. He was very worried about our manufacturing sector. And I hope he's still worried about it. And I hope he has some smart people talking to him about we need to keep the doors open of America's factories. We need to get more Americans working, producing physical, tangible things. Because the day we stop doing that is the day we stop being able to consume. A service economy is fine. It can be productive. I work in the service economy. I have for a long time. There's nothing wrong with that. That can be productive, and to some degree, we actually can export services. Now that we live in this interconnected global internet world, everything is digital. You can export digital things, but we can't afford to stop manufacturing because somebody has to build the respirators, somebody has to produce the masks, somebody has to produce the medical supplies that people need at the hospitals. We have to have physical hospitals. We can't digitize that, but that's kind of where we are right now.
What's interesting, one thing that I talked about with the, or I should say, is in the executive order from California, is this identification of critical infrastructure. And what's interesting is Governor Ducey actually today, I think actually just within an hour or so of us going on the air, he went ahead and identified critical infrastructure for Arizona. And I didn't have enough time to go through all of it, but it's interesting because the take that I got from it is that basically what the governor was doing is he's trying to say cities and counties cannot stop these things. That's what the order was, because all the order is identifying critical infrastructure, saying what it is in the state of Arizona, and basically saying these things local governments cannot stop. Period. You cannot stop these things. And so it's interesting because it's a completely different approach than what some of the other governors are doing, because obviously, for instance, with the California situation, they cut and paste the Homeland Security guidelines. But what Governor Ducey did was he defined these different industries. Interestingly enough, one that stuck out to me was real estate. Mm-hmm. Real estate agents are considered critical infrastructure under Governor Ducey's executive order. But what it does is it means that the city of Phoenix, city of Tucson, city of Flagstaff, they can't go ahead and say, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Under our city emergency decree, you can't do real estate, for instance.
Right.
Because his order supersedes them. So I thought it was interesting because it seems to me that was a deliberate attempt to make sure that local governments don't do what you're talking about, that they don't start shutting down things that are important, that need to be open, and don't completely annihilate our economy. That was my take from it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things like restaurants and bars, and I understand, like, if you are a waitress in a bar or a restaurant, if you own a restaurant, that these 2 weeks might absolutely crush you economically. But the fact is,
right now, any bar that has a kitchen is happy they have a kitchen. I'll tell you that.
Oh, sure.
Any bar, because I'm seeing it on my because I use Uber Eats, and I'm seeing these new restaurants that are actually bars using Uber Eats for the first time, because they are staying open to do the delivery options. And anybody who has a kitchen right now is thanking the heavens that they made that investment, because it's the bars that don't have kitchens. They're the ones that are completely screwed. And I also thought it was interesting with the situation in Arizona that the Governor Ducey specifically essentially changed the law so that they can deliver alcohol. So they can actually deliver alcohol with these deliveries, which I thought was kind of interesting, because it was like, that is a big moneymaker for them. So it's like if they're allowed to deliver alcohol, that could keep a lot of these places afloat. Theoretically, it really could.
And there was no reason not to allow that before, but this crisis has forced a lot of common sense on the people. There was no reason not to allow people to deliver alcohol before. I guess people are worried that if you have more alcohol, you'll have more violence. And as a police officer, you've seen that. People get drunk and they hit the people around them, their wife, their kids, their whoever's within arm's length, unfortunately.
Well, I'm very curious to see what the domestic violence rates are going to be in a lot of places, as far as with the quarantine situation, shelter in place, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I can only imagine they're going to skyrocket.
Well, that's exactly what I've heard. And that is something that I said there was no reason not to allow before, but now that I think about it, I've heard that domestic violence is absolutely skyrocketing in Houston right now. Everything else is down. There are fewer murders. There are fewer robberies. Nobody's doing much of anything. Nobody's leaving their homes. But child abuse is skyrocketing. Domestic violence, it's all off the charts because people are stuck at home. That's not exclusively because of alcohol, of course, but
no, that's because people are stuck at home. Because it's like the old joke. When I used to work on the holidays, you end up start calling almost every holiday "Beat Your Wife Day," because people are stuck together with people that they're normally not with, and that's what happens.
Right.
It's just kind of just the way it is, unfortunately. So, but I think that there is a possible silver lining here. Sure. Like I said, I do think that at least in Arizona, the governor is trying to take proactive steps to ensure that things don't get quite as bad in terms of shutting everything down. And the president has said some encouraging things too. They've talked about Hanes coming forward and saying we're going to make masks. We're going to stay open and make masks. You know what I mean? And They specifically use as an example where Hanes approached them and said that, and it was something that they said they hadn't even really considered that Hanes could start making masks. Because it just wasn't something that occurred to them. So, obviously a little bit more out of the box thinking is necessary, but that's also incumbent upon the leaders in the economic community, the CEOs, to say, hey, what else can we make? You know what I mean? What can we make that we can stay open?
Right.
Ventilators and masks are just two examples. Ventilators and masks are just two examples, but there are certainly other things. You know what I mean? That they could do. They can shift, and then they can keep their doors open.
Right. And it may not be obvious if you're a government regulator that it's going to be the auto industry that's going to rescue the ventilator industry. It may not be obvious that Hanes is going to make the masks. I don't know what else Hanes makes that makes it a good fit. I suppose there are probably other industries as well that could move into that space. But the fact is, now is the time to produce and to react to the situation and not sit at home, shut everything down, and wait for the crisis to get worse.
I did see that CVS says they're hiring 50,000 new workers, and they plan to hire a great deal of people, specifically from the hospitality industry, that have been furloughed. So there are people that I think are looking at this and looking at ways, for lack of a better term, to get around this, because that's the way I kind of look at it. They're looking at, because there are industries obviously that are still going to have to be open. Grocery stores, obviously, the list goes on and on. Like I said, I wish I had the text in front of me from Governor Ducey's order, or you can even go to that link from the executive order from California that I was talking about. That goes to the Homeland Security link, and that's what everybody is trying to emulate, is the Homeland Security recommendations of critical infrastructure. So it gives you a good idea of the industries that are quote unquote protected.
Right. Well, we're seeing more people working from home. We're seeing a lot more delivery. And I think these were changes that had to happen anyway. It's kind of the direction that things were going. But a lot of companies simply didn't want to make the investment into figuring out how they're going to enable working, telework, remote working. And it just makes so much sense that we waste how many hours, how many gallons of gas every year having people drive to jobs that there's no logical reason for them to drive to. It's so wasteful, but it's a lack of imagination that a lot of businesses have. So I guess if we're looking for silver linings, that's one of them. It's forcing businesses to be more creative. It's shaking things up. And I hope that when this crisis passes, and I'm hoping that it will pass here in the next couple weeks, that we'll have learned some important lessons and that we don't just allow the economy to go into free fall, because that's where we're headed right now. We're seeing money being just dumped into the economy. We're going to see, in my opinion, we're going to see really a dangerous bout of inflation. I think that's going to be the big difference between the Main Street bailout and the Wall Street bailout, is that the government doesn't know how to handle a bailout like this. The money is going to go into the economy, and they're not going to be able to unwind it, unlike the way that they've managed it in the past with the banks. There's no, as far as I know, there's no playbook to handle simply handing out trillions of dollars directly to American citizens. So,
yeah, it's true. That's very true. We'll see how that plays out.
We will. I don't have any insight. Completely uncharted territory. Well, I think we've covered everything that we want to cover in today's episode. It's getting to be a little late. So how about, are you ready to wrap up? Or is there anything else you want to add, Eric?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, from Liberty Starship, this is Pete. I'm here with Eric, and you keep flying free.